Thanks everybody for joining us in our next session of the Augmented Society Network. Just a reminder, the Augmented Society Network is a global thematic network under RSA US, which is obviously part of the larger RSA. And what we look to do with the ASN is, a lot of letters here, is to come together, bring people together, talking about what does the future of society look like? How do we augment that society to bring about the best opportunity for growth, realization, society, et cetera, et cetera. And the three main components that we were looking to do was A, networking opportunity, B, was to create a sandbox, a way for participants to collaborate, to build out things, take a chance on things, bring companies together to do stuff sort of under a mutual NDA to see what we can knock out of the park. And then the third was to create white papers and perhaps affect policy. And that is what, as we go into Zoe describing what this session is going to be about and education, be thinking in the term of, out of this, we want to create white paper policy recommendation so that we can really, instead of just talking heads and just going around in circles, there's an actual output, an outcome from this. So we should all be thinking about that. We are very excited that we've got people from numerous countries on board. We've got people from numerous continents, which is great. And that's what this is all about. By participating here, we do hope that you'll continue with by sharing your email, and we can then invite you to the collaborative platform, whatever we'll be using, whether that's OneDrive or what have you, so we can collaborate on what this final output is. Also, if there are people that you feel can either benefit from listening or actually participate, which is what we're hoping for, this is going to be posted on augmentedsociety.org, just like most of our other content is. So people can listen and then share with us or get in touch with Zoe or me to become a part of the group and actually help in the output. So if somebody misses today, doesn't mean that they cannot participate on a move forward basis. So I'm going to hand it over to Zoe so she can set the table on what we're really diving into today. And I know we usually set for an hour. This is really chock full. We've got 2 sessions about this, and hopefully in between and after. So there's a lot to really unpack. So if we go a little bit over an hour, our apologies. We are respectful of time, but there's a lot of really good stuff here. So Zoe, take it away.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see everyone. Welcome, Maria, from Australia as well. So we know you've got up very early to join us today. So thank you for coming along. Thanks to everyone else who's managed to be here as well. Now, this is a 2-part session. And as Jonathan has already mentioned, we are looking to create a comment and form opinion that can be used by others from this and the next session. We'll also be doing the same with our value sessions, which we are beginning to put together, that will come in October and November. And then we'll be going on as well with our third theme, which is the resilience and the ability to supply and to create. So getting stuck in this morning, I think there's 3 main things that we want to look at today. And those are turning learning on its head. Where would you actually start? What's the purpose of education? If you could do whatever you wanted to do, what would you actually do? Why are children and others wanting to learn? What is it about that? When was it institutionalized and why? What is its purpose? What is it actually there to fulfill? So less so about the issues that I know are prevalent now. What we're really looking to try to find in amongst the chaos and the stress is a way that we could use all of the tools that we have available to us to really step the game up when it comes to young people, the curious the world over. And what's really great is that we have lots of educators here with us today. So we will be able to speak from experience. And I know, having been a teacher myself, although my experience is now older, we can all have great and value propositions in this. I loved what Amy brought to the table as well, which is the nothing about us without us comment, which obviously goes back and has been referred to many times in history and has certain roots. But I think it's incredibly important to understand who is involved in this, why they're involved in this, and what the roles of those international, state, local and private organizations, parents, everybody, what is the role in that in terms of delivering? Is this something that we can begin to operate more as a relay, for example, and understand where those organizations should be and maybe shouldn't be? And we also then really want to make the most of a moment in which it's absolutely fine to not know what's going on. This is the moment to reveal your weakness, to reveal your vulnerability in terms of understanding the current situation. Because I think if anyone says they absolutely know what's going on, they're in another world to the one we're all in. So I'm very much enjoying this as a time where I don't have to know. I don't have to be, holding the keys to all of the truth or all of the knowledge. It's a wonderful, freeing time to be able to look at a topic that we are all struggling with, and one that's so incredibly important in terms of all of our futures. So I've made it sound really massive as usual. I do apologise about that, but it is an enormous subject.
Well, Zoe, the beautiful thing is we've talked about the pandemic as something that has just broken down all the rules. And so we don't have to say we're beholden. And there are often many people that will say that education has been broken for a while, but the train was just moving and we were continuing on that path. So let's look at this as an opportunity. If we could create anew, what is the most important thing? What do we need to do? And as we look at all the parts of society, not just educators, which are key, but as a father struggling to get my kids on a computer daily, how do we move forward? And one of the beautiful things that we were talking about in preparation, and Mitch has graciously offered to sort of take notes so that we do have, so people can just freely talk, and he can really put things to paper. But it's not about, we know that there are different education systems, not just between countries, but between school districts across the board. So for this first one, we really wanted to get to what is the core that that education should be. What are those pieces that need to be there? And then as we move forward in this exercise, we can look at, maybe it's the next session that we start to look at, what are some of the pieces that are already there that fulfill the needs that we talk about today, as opposed to saying, oh, well, in the UK, there's this, and in this, it's very interesting. And we could get bogged down in talking about the technologies, whether it's a Zoom or what have you.
So we will be moving on to technologies because obviously we're interested in that. But what Mitch and I were having a conversation about, were schools created by factory owners so that the children could be kept there whilst others worked? And then we went into a rather dark conversation about the whole purpose of that. I don't think we need to go there. What we're getting down to the very essence of what that is.
So I don't know if that's a cue, but I think from my standpoint, the reason, from what I've seen, the reason education was started was public education was started in the U.S. was to have a labor force for factories. And there were two parts to that. One was preparing kids with the basic skills they needed. Part of that is compliance. Part of that is being able to read and write. Part of that is arithmetic. And that was the first part. And then the second part was to weed out the people who couldn't become factory workers, and also to weed up the people who would become the elites. And so there's a great weeding out process that was created with our education system, and it was founded based on the industrialized systems that how factories ran. And so that was basically 100 years ago that we created this education system. We've learned a lot about how people learn, but we haven't really changed the system dramatically since then. On the other hand, we have a phenomenal opportunity, and it's a horrible problem that we're facing with all the different things that are happening with society. But we have just a phenomenal opportunity now to take something that we knew wasn't really working. We become incredibly obvious that it's not working at all, and now figure out, well, what is it that we really want education to do, and then discuss some of those priorities, and then figure out, well, which ones are the most important, and then how do we go about doing that? And that's what I'm hoping that we can pull together in maybe a white paper and through these discussions.
If I can add in some more complications too, and if anything, COVID has raised or helped us see better how much more school does as a child welfare agency, as a breakfast and lunch provider, as a just basic childcare. You think about the parents who are struggling to get to work while their kids are not in school because they're on Zoom. It's an easy problem to solve. Can we have it fixed by 4 o'clock?
Sure. I think
I was shooting for 3:30, but
okay.
Yeah, I've just finished reading The Death of Policing, which talks about the expanded role that the police find themselves in. Their role has been broadened, and it is in dire need of review. I think that's a very good point, Bob.
I think it fits in many ways, fixing schools is a wicked problem in so many ways. We can make improvement, but I don't know that we're going to fix it.
So in terms of scoping how we see this white paper being, it could be addressed to individual schools that I know Tim, who's joined us, it looks like you're in your classroom, Tim. Tim's at a school that probably could take ideas and just act upon them themselves. In other cases, it's districts, school districts, or cities, or states, or entire governments, but also foundations. So whether it's the Gates Foundation or those that have the money to instill this stuff. So if we're thinking about the end product being something that can be handed over to convey our thoughts on this and hopefully help them at whatever level to affect good change. So let me put one question out for everybody, and this is I am certainly not an expert in this, so I don't want to be talking much at all. I just want to help facilitate the conversation. What are some of those core things that education needs to deliver?
I hate starting on the negative, but being in my classroom, and this is day 3, would normally have 41 students behind me. The first gut is that we don't turn the campus into a testing center, that instruction can be done digitally, online, asynchronously, but then the reason for them to come onto campus would be to be assessed. That's not, we want to avoid that. We want to create the campus a place where the kids want to. And it's interesting because you could talk about the different parts of development where food services, social services are also something that the campuses are providing, but a place where the kids want to come to learn. I think to come to discuss it and in a sense, not be bombarded by facts, but actually have that chance to have a live discussion. Because if the information can be distributed in new forms and new modes, but then that opportunity for them to create a community live, face to face, that's an amazing opportunity. So I think that's a direction that I would love to see happen.
So that's a beautiful place to start. Community, socialization. Taking what kids actually learn, taking what they learn out of the equation. I always looked at, starting in kindergarten and moving on, it's learning how to deal with others, make friends, all these things that have nothing to do with 1, 2, 3s and ABCs, right? And then you get to higher education or college, and that's a place where you get to sort of be adults and have independence away from your parents, depending on which choice you make, but there's still some guidance until you graduate, and then you fend for yourself. So Mitch, to that point, maybe one of the major pieces is, and what I think is missing with Zoom is the social ability or community, the way to help kids learn how to interact.
And obviously, just in my own experience, lessons were, everything else happened and I happened to go to a lesson, is how I felt about school. And I was testing boundaries because I knew I was in a space that wasn't under my control. So I would try things and I'd quickly learn that this particular idea that I'd had wasn't the best one, or I would see how others would react, which would enable me to understand what was important, what wasn't. And I was always a terrible joker. You know, if there was an innuendo or a piece of fun to be had, you know, I was all over it. And that's still how I am to a large degree today. That wouldn't be in this equation. I would just be an absolute pain now in this. I mean, I was a pain anyway, but.
So to bring it down, you would say that like cause and effect is a huge thing, or consequence is.
I think so.
Yeah. Anything else, everyone? I know there's something else. Come on, people.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link into the chat, okay? Because I've been trying to like document some of the things that people have said, but change them into my own language. So you have viewing rights to this. But if there's things that I'm sure there's things that I got wrong, and there's things that are left out of this. So maybe people can either volunteer to come up, or you can type them into the chat. Jonathan, you were bringing up, you know, social and stuff like that. And it's kind of related, you know, to what extent is that the same as development as a human being and citizen? To what extent is that related to the 4 C's, which is number H, or letter H? Then there's the social benefit, and then there's the social emotional learning. So all of those are a little bit related, but they are somewhat different.
And you think that if we were to do sort of formulate ideas, that in a sense you just created a little framework in which we could address it in those different ways. Well, they're related, but they are different.
So I'm not sure how to do that. That's a great idea.
Well, well, you know, you talked about the socialization, and then I always at the high school level, we're working into the civics instruction, but then there's the social emotional learning, which should be related to the first, but they tend to be divided. And then the 4 C's is more that academic, but the application of those 4 C's overlap all of them. And so I think that we could address them, you know, it'd be like 4 different meetings. And one would be just to address that one part of the social emotional learning. The other one would be you could discuss the academic, or the way in which it's taught and where it's taught and how it's taught. I'm thinking out loud.
But in some ways, that's the nub of the problem that we have, that all of these pieces are there. They're known in the education field and the literature. Which ones do we try to get our hands on? Which ones do we try to address? When there's other people that are just as well-meaning that are advocating this particular side or that one, and you get a lot of people advocating for one piece of the puzzle. And as Jonathan said earlier, it's, you know, trying to change the train, or other people have used fixing the plane while it's flying kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny because the one that I say, it's like jumping out of a plane hoping to find a parachute on the way down.
Yeah. Yeah. But in some ways, that's the plan. Or that we'll just jump out now, we'll solve the parachute problem later, you know, in the sense of giving people directions without a sense of where they're really going.
And there's really no problem until you hit the ground. So all the way down, you're fine.
Yeah. But I think that, not to raise too big of a caution early, that's a real problem of how do we come out with anything that has enough refinement to position it to do something, and not just rehash everything written in the last 100 years about education and schooling.
Right. Which I think if we can take it out and go to metaphor, or not even metaphor, go to the core concept. I mean, is it that education needs to be there for childcare? Is it that education needs to be for the socialization? Like, if we can get those, and then it's a matter of, we can go into, like when Tim was talking about the multiple ways that you teach the 4 C's or how they overlap. I know Ian's working on a project that educates in 3, like within an hour can teach a whole bunch of stuff, but it's still presented the same content in 3 different ways. And we see that all the time in education. So again, if we could right now just really strip it back just to what is the core need of education, and then from that we can start to build it back up again to come up with, and if we strip out to the core, then we can start thinking in metaphor to come up with things that haven't been tried before or haven't been thought of in a certain way before, and how we're going to educate.
Yeah, but core need for whom?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good question.
Robert, I saw
Take it
your
away, Amy.
suggestion. I'm Amy. I teach 7th grade science in Las Vegas, although I've taught multiple grades and ages all around the world pretty much. To me, one of my most important things that I want my students to learn is you are in charge of your learning. The knowledge is not there to be memorized. You are literally co-creating your own knowledge. There is nothing I can teach you that is the same as what I taught another student. There's nothing I can learn from you that's the same as what I taught another student, because it's a dynamic process between us two, each other, and ourselves as a group. So it's different every time, but in order to do that, you really have to teach the students how to listen to their voice, but also know when to be quiet and listen to others. So it's about, to me, what the purpose of education is helping students realize their potential. End of story. It doesn't have to be with actions. It can just be them knowing how they learn best, where to go when they want to learn something, what to do if they didn't succeed the first time, so how to pick themselves back up and get back out there. It's about the idea that there's no one else on earth like you, so your voice matters. Let's get your voice heard, and let's figure out how you can best do that while respecting everyone else around you. But it's very difficult. I mean, even by 4th or 5th grade, my students come to me very passive. It's kind of systematically, it's beaten out of them. Or they're the opposite, where they're like about to flunk out because they just are out of control with everything else. But, you know, I teach in a public school, so.
I teach at a public school as well. One of my favorite stories is I was teaching an AP history class, and then I asked one of the students, just, you know, threw out a question to her, but it was a critical thinking question, but she thought she was there to memorize it. And I asked her a question, and her eyes got wide, and her mouth dropped, and a little bit of smoke behind her head, because she said out loud, "I didn't think you were going to ask me to think. I just wanted to be able to answer the question and fulfill that role." But I was like, no, that's not why we're here. We're here for you to think for yourself, so you can have the understand in whatever language it is, how you interpret that information, but it's meaningful to you. And that was a moment for her where she realized that she was in a different class.
I'm Gigi. I'm new to the group, and I teach at a public university. And I want to echo what Timothy and Amy just said, because students come to me as 20-year-olds and they've learned how to succeed in school and not necessarily how to go make and break things on their own. So we spend a lot of time re-breaking them so they can learn to learn. And so part of it is that I have found there's many different learning environments. There's not one. So the broad sweeping generalizations about school is X kind of makes the heckles on my neck go up. But that students oftentimes are living in these systems that are self-success loops, that they think that they're trying to win at the game of what happens in the four walls, and are not necessarily robustly learning how to explore outside the walls. And actually, I'm finding in teaching 140 students last term online that actually we now are breaking the four walls and letting can push students to use this digital space to go out now and learn how to do things in the world. But a lot of it is we've got the training wheels and structured based on the four walls of delivery and succeeding for the next year of school. So I'll get off my soapbox.
Perfect.
I think all of this is a really keen response to Bob's question of who is this for? And with what we've just talked about in the last few minutes, it's for both the students and the educators and administrations. How do you create that environment where there can be exploration, which we know there's challenges therein, but again, if we're thinking just core, this is a good place to be going as one of our pieces.
But if we do, we also have to acknowledge that the admins are caught in the middle ground between school boards that have different accountability structures. And that doesn't mean that we don't go where we're going, but we have to acknowledge some of those overlapping tensions.
And I know, Amy, that's one of the things that you've brought up is just the structure is destructive.
the structure, and also in a resource poor environment, you can't afford to take any risks because you can't have any weight.
Okay, so-
Thinking about your budget, you can't afford to start your own business and waste money if you're barely making rent that month. I mean, some people will, but most won't. So a lot of my learners are risk averse. A lot of the teachers and the admin are risk averse because resources are so scarce.
So if I may offer for this exercise, because I deal a lot with companies around the world trying to look at the future and then meet that future. And that's why I talk a lot about metaphor, because if we as humans want to go back to what the world is that we live in today and use that as something that controls us from being able to think about what if we could do this, then what? And all of these points, I get it. I'm not so naive to think we're going to put out this paper and people are going to say, drop everything we've done and go there. But as long as we're thinking about what's going to hold us back, we're not going to be able to really come up with crystallizing what needs to happen, what we believe needs to happen, looking at all these very important things that we've already brought up in just like 15 minutes.
So there's an interesting project in China where a company, I can't remember all of the names, but they reversed the roles of teachers and the children. The children became the teachers, and the children were tasked with the learning. And I think it's quite interesting to turn those things around. And I know, Jonathan, this is something that you do as well, where you think of something, in reverse, think of it in a way that just wouldn't be explainable in any other way, which is the world that we find ourselves in now. So what if the kids became the holders of the baton through education? They controlled what went on.
Interesting that in the summer when my students in a sense had a vacuum, that they took it upon themselves to actually do those things technologically they could, because there was this void they felt and they filled it. And that can be done in the fall. If the kids can do it on their own, we can bring it to them. They're ready to go.
Can I just pitch in something here?
Absolutely.
We're talking about the schools and the pupils, which is, we talk about the kids. I'm not an educationist, by the way. I'm not a teacher, never taught, but I'll talk about a bit more what I'm doing maybe later on when it's more relevant. But just really as a parent and kids, and there's really interesting research just came out a few days ago. It was published in the Times, but it was basically the education gap, learning gap in the UK, and measuring at when they entered the school, and basically it was done at the GCSE, which in the UK is about 16-year-old. Chinese kids in the UK, 2 years ahead of white British, and it comes down to that. And in fact, any Asian, anybody, from that was percentage upwards, and the only learning gap below the average white Brit child, which is the majority, was white or black Caribbeans or the Gypsy Romani community was very, very much down there. So the obvious one picking up there is a lot about that your home and your parents and the influence of the importance of education and what it is and learning from that perspective from there. And I think in the context of this is from schools, I get a sense of there are some parents who think, hey, that's a school's job, not my job, and it's it's that enthusiasm to learn, etc. So that's got to be playing the mix really in terms of what schools do. My experience of schools, my kids have gone to a few countries, and in Belgium, you could drop your child off at the age of 2 from a childcare, all paid by the state, and right the way through. So it's the role of the school in community was one thing, but here I think we're focusing about, is it the school role or is it really learning in the pupil? I wasn't quite sure where
I don't know that we specifically got there.
Okay, all right. Okay, fair point.
So yeah, don't worry. This is just unpacking things.
Okay.
And I think judging by, well, I know this anyway, but we've got an awful lot of reference material. Some of this, obviously, other people have done, and we need to look at. And I think where we will need to differentiate and understand exactly what it is that we're trying to do before it becomes something valuable. And I think what I was picking up there is just some of the things in regard to origin and context. Because as someone who's moved countries, I find my context has gone. My references to various things aren't there anymore, and I'm relearning. And that's something that's, I think, incredibly important when we talk about children or young people who've been disenfranchised or who are otherwise outside of this currently broken system. So there's a discussion there, absolutely.
Right, and carrying off on what Gigi put in there, and also tying to what a lot of people have said, and maybe a piece that needs to really be explored is the removing limitations on assessment. And even if we went back to No Child Left Behind, or any of these acts that try to make all assessment the same for everybody, knowing Amy's already talked about how no kids are the same. We know that. You can have two kids. One really excels at this remote learning and one is totally turned off by school now because of it. So even with the parents, there's a challenge there. If we were to loosen our guidelines on assessment and be more organic or malleable with that, and maybe redefine what are we assessing? Because look, as much as people want to say these are not businesses, they try to treat them like businesses with real outcomes. And how do you assess whether your teachers are teaching the right thing or students are gaining the right thing before moving on to the next class? Maybe that worked for the old way of something, and it doesn't work now, right? So can we change the values of assessment?
Yeah, in the UK, the curriculum is generally controlled by whatever government is in at that time, or who has the latest idea to have another go at education. Mitch, we were talking about it as well I had no idea what Texas, how influential that is, and how those textbooks are created. I remember when I was at school, most of the textbooks were 30 or 40 years old. I felt like what I was learning was out of date. It wasn't what was actually happening. All of those, elements that surround more enriched education or less enriched education, or those that can use online in a really valuable and flexible way, as opposed to using online because it's the only thing and the only way you can do it. They're all different outlooks.
So when we started formulating what this program was going to be, it was a conversation we had with Cyril, where his son is learning Portuguese from somebody in Brazil. So there's a subject that's being learned. And I know that, again, Gigi's putting up that there's a lot of alternative learning programs. My daughter's in one. Like, we can come up with specific examples. So let's go. I'm sorry, I keep on driving back. What is the core need that we're fulfilling by all these things? And maybe it is we've already nailed it with Amy's comment on individuality and responsibility, and being able to create an environment where individuals can learn and that we allow them to learn in their own way at their own pace. I have no idea how that works, but that's, maybe that's one of the things. What are the other core concepts that we've got to bring this down to?
And what is it we're all desperate that kids get back to? What is it that we're trying to return them to?
I think the problem is you want them to function in society, but you also want society to change. So we're putting a lot on kids right now. You're preparing them for a future that is, like you said, it's unknown. So I want them to be flexible. Yeah, I want them to have all of these soft skills and everything else, but also I want them to be change agents to change the things about society that aren't working for any of us, really. But it's a very fine line, because it's like, well, should I just teach them to be like a barber because like that's easy and they can make money, or should I train them to really be an engineer and design something new? You need workers, we need barbers, we need engineers as a society, but at the same time, I'm always teaching to that individual child. You are on this earth for a reason. What is that reason? It could be more than one. Let's figure it out and do it and maximize it. I really think that's, if we could do that on a large scale. And school itself, that is for community and social skills and everything else and the dynamics of learning. But because of the internet, I can learn everything by myself at home using technology. So what is the added value of a school or an education system?
So sorry, I just jumped in there. Can you learn everything online? You can get information, but who's providing it and who's sourced it? There's the key thing when I was at school. It was about being, objectively critical and being sociable, and about trying to contribute to society. And that was engaging in meaningful conversation. Unless you understand enough stuff about the core, you end up, everybody's got an opinion, but is it an informed opinion? And, you know, that sort of level. So, you know, again, I'm not an educationist, but basically you go to school, hopefully to learn stuff, to actually contribute to society and, you know, make your own way in life, whatever that's going to mean when you leave. Who knows what they're going to want to do when they leave school anyway. You all change things and move things in life. So it's a lot about that. It's a little bit more complex, but fundamentally there are some things for me about society and being active and being respectful for other people's opinion. You know, just all of those things are, you know, great. You don't actually understand and get, at the end of the day, lots about qualifications. Yes, it is about a lot of that. You know, that's the way the world works. Unfortunately, it's all there. It might move a bit, but you still got to have that appetite to learn, and if that's drilled out of you because school is just so bad, then you can still succeed and not fail at school. You know, my wife, you know, she went through 8 schools, left it, but she was still the first female VP at Citibank, and she left with 1 GCSE, you know, biology. So it's not you know, a disaster if you haven't got there necessarily, but that comes down to the person. But anyway, yeah, you can get a bit emotional about learning in schools and everything, but fundamentally it's there is a bit of a failure around there, and maybe we're asking schools to do too much. Maybe we're putting too much emphasis, I think, on what schools should do, and overthinking it too much.
I work with taxonomies and understanding information structures, and I said to Jonathan, well, you know, surely we should be looking at some sort of structure of what somebody needs to know to be able to function in a rapidly changing world. And he said, no, not yet. You know, that's not necessarily the point, but it is something I feel that is valuable on a values perspective, on a listening. Some of the things, Amy, you're talking about, knowing how to listen, knowing when to listen, knowing how to survive, is surely a fundamental need that isn't, you know, some people survive in one way, other people survive in other ways. It's not just about surviving, but it's about making the most of your uniqueness.
I think too, maybe I'm biased because I think I told you, but my 8th grader is autistic. She's on the autism spectrum. Right. And recently the creator of Pokemon, who, you know, is an autistic man, it was like the 20-year anniversary of his creation of Pokemon. So I think the idea is our school system is overly biased towards extroverted socialization. The truth is, with technology now, you don't always need all those social skills. Because if I'm going to sit at a computer and create a bunch of Pokemon characters, I could be a millionaire. I mean, there's value in that. You know what I mean? So the idea that we know how to interact with each other, okay, that's important, but also, do I understand technology? Can I respond to technology? Can I shape it? You know, the world is changing.
I know we've got Maria back, who's joining us from Australia. I don't know, Maria, whether you've managed to hear enough of the conversation to want to have an input at this point.
Thanks, Zoe. Hi, everyone. Yes, I've been listening intently, and I had to jump out for a minute, but back again. I think, I mean, the topic we're talking about is, as somebody mentioned earlier, quite a wicked one, because there's different layers we're talking about all at the one time. One is the process of learning. 2 is the education system, which may or may not have anything to do with the process of learning. Obviously, hopefully it does. But are we thinking about turning learning on its head, or are we thinking about turning the education system on its head? Because they're 2 different things. Obviously, they're related. And so, and I agree with Amy around what is it that schools are supposed to do? This is the education system in terms of preparing, socializing. It's deeply cultural, embedded very deeply in culture, and preparing children for their role in society, which is also a culture, and to be productive citizens of the world, socially, economically. And so it's complex, and we do that through, in most of our school systems, not all around the world, but we do that mostly through the formal learning of topics, and then the byproduct of a school system which socializes. I don't know that, I think teachers for sure at an individual school level know and that they are socializing students for their place in the world and how to behave and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, all those things that go around the actual topics that one learns about, whether it be biology or geography. But those other things, the social emotional side of it, the confidence side of it, all those, the wrapper, the whole child sort of wrapper around content is incredibly important because it helps you to make your way in the world and know how to and have confidence and so on like that. And yet it's actually not even in the curriculum. It's a sort of a byproduct, but one of the most important, really one of the most important. And so we're learning those things through the process of schooling systems. So, I mean, I like the whole idea of individualized learning and inquiry-based and allowing a personalized approach. I love that idea in terms of learning. But when you put that into a school system, incredibly difficult to actually make happen because of all the things that you guys have been talking about in terms of the structuring and the cost and so on and so on. And I agree also with, if we are socializing and preparing children for the world of tomorrow, what is the world of tomorrow going to look like? Well, who knows? Certainly being able to engage and exceed, whatever that means, you know, in terms of success in a digital world, being able to work in that world, being able to socialize in that world is incredibly important, but it's still social.
It's interesting because that education, while not necessarily taught, it is facilitated by the schools, and it's very individual when you're at recess or at lunch. And that's where you learn the hierarchy of, you know, the extrovert and the introvert and everything in between, you know, and all the different.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, of course, Diggs, please.
So Gigi's point, and I'm loving the soapbox, so please don't apologize for being on the soapbox. So for my background, I'm at RSA US currently, but I previously was running a higher education consortium across Pennsylvania, small liberal arts colleges. So my background is mostly in higher ed. What I wanted to sort of point out was that it's that learning to fail dynamic is what I really think has been missing, at least in terms of, I might be the person that's been in college most recently. I'm making that assumption, but I'm not going to put a stake in the ground on it. I went to a small private college. I came out of a small private high school. There was a boarding situation. And the amount of times that I had to be the one to question in both locations, my friends who were like, oh my God, I just need to know how to get an A. I was like, why the hell is that important? What is that going to actually do for you in the long run? Yes, it might help you get that first job. Yes, it might help you, or in the high school situation, yes, it might help you get into your first choice for early decision, which is that doesn't even matter. I'm not even going to get into that. But it's just like, what will that actually do for you in life? Like it's that question. And I think Gigi's been getting us to try to think to that point. And I think that's something that really should be part of this work that we're doing. How can we move the system, whether that's K through 16, K through 12, whatever, or 5-year-olds through finishing college, whatever that is that learning to fail piece that I think is the most critical part that's been missing across the board. The fact that Gigi has to spend, and I had to, you know, as a fellow student, had to deal with kids who just didn't know how to fail in college. Like what was happening before then? Like was it the participation awards that everybody wants to complain about? Like what are the barriers to that are within the system and outside the system? That's sort of I see Mitch smiling, but that to me is, I think, the key question that really needs to be wrestled with. And I will shut up.
And it has to do with the kids when they leave too. So I spent some time this morning with the House of Blues Foundation, who's trying to design programs for kids in the arts to come out of school to actually be able to work in the arts. And they're putting together programs to talk about failure after people leave, because it is so not in the lens of young people who are in high school and college. They don't see the failure. They see the bright, shiny Instagram postings. And so actually getting the stories out there of how people fail repeatedly is such a gigantic eye-opener for kids. And they're not seeing that in the school environment, and it's not rewarded in the school environment. I give assignments to undergraduates, upper division undergraduates. I give them fail projects where I said 10 hours, fail really big and hard. And some of them panic because they haven't had to do anything. Extracurricular gets to be sometimes fail projects, but not in a school environment. So we're spending a lot of time with some of the programs I build, helping kids see how other people fail.
Maybe implicit in a few of these is, and maybe this is an angle we might want to think about focusing on, is breaking the monolithic there is one outcome, one goal, one path to get there. You think about if a 17-year-old goes home and says, Mom, Dad, I want to major in anthropology, and they have a heart attack. And we have this one definition of success, one path to get there. You need the top grades, top test scores, top college, and not letting these multiple paths that Amy was talking about, kind of implicit in some of what Diggs was talking about, and the failure that I can try different things. It's not the end of the world if I get a B. It's not the end of the world if I get into a second choice college. Taking away some of the tension that there is one holy way to do schools, which we tend to get wrapped up in, of top grades, top courses, high test scores for everyone.
If you can manage and express failure as an experience rather than as something negative, then the opportunity to stay engaged is much, much wider and more likely to happen.
Yeah, it'd be great for college applications. I wish I could get away with it interviewing potential staff members. What did you really screw up on?
Yeah, without having something really clever that you discovered in there as well. Be really honest about it.
Those spin into a string.
I was going to say, I have plenty of kids that know how to fail. They're not worried about that. It's how to get back up afterwards and not just stay there and be like,
what's the perspective of
it? Just no drive sometimes, because they're so used to failure that they're just like, it's inevitable. I did my best. That's all you can ask. Done.
Yeah. But how many of your kids either they fail so easily and readily they've given up, or the ones that are so friggin' fragile that they won't do anything where there's a possibility of failure?
Right.
There's maybe 8 kids in the world that are left in the middle there after we break out into that pair.
Yeah.
So it's an issue it's a much larger societal issue, because there hasn't been the marketing about the fact that there are people that have succeeded that didn't go to college or didn't finish college or failed miserably. And interestingly, a lot of money is going, and I know Maria deals a lot with funding and tracking where the funding is from and everything, but you look at the Bay Area here in California, there's so much failure there. And it's, but this is the first time, let's go back 30, 40 years when venture capital really, what we know as venture capital really took shape. And hell, we can argue that form of venture capital is now gone because they're not willing to take as many risks. But we can uplift failure in business because we can see how people might have started 3 companies before they hit their unicorn. And you can promote that, you can market that, where that might not have existed because we were dealing with corporations that had been around for so long, people didn't even remember how they started. It's an interesting dilemma, a much larger picture, but I don't think it's insurmountable to get it so that people can start to understand and see the light that there is no one path. And yes, you might have things easier if you go to Harvard and graduate from Harvard, but that doesn't mean that because you don't get into Harvard, you shouldn't go on with your life.
No. So a piece of the puzzle is, how do you create a healthy, creative childhood?
Yes.
And that's a co-construction of the kid and everybody in their lives.
What was that, Amy?
I said, go to the forest where there's no other humans. That's how.
That works.
So I'm wondering if since technically we were thinking of 5 more minutes and we'll probably take longer than this, how do you want to start pulling this together so that we can then leverage it and really accomplish a lot in the next session?
I think what we need to do is look at this document that you're building, Mitch, and work on that, and we'll give access to it and really start a feedback loop of what are those core things that we really should focus on. We know that there's overlap. So what are the key concepts that should drive? And then we build out from those concepts. What does this look like? What does this mean for the future? Then we could come into the next session with, okay, what are the pieces that fit into that? What aligns with those core concepts that we've all agreed are the places that we should probably go? And I don't see us finishing this by the end of the next session. I see that being another.
And then we'll have failed.
We don't
Great.
mind that though, Mitch, because
Okay.
around at the moment. So
because then we'll come back afterward and we'll finish it. So
I think what would be good is if everyone who wants to be involved in putting this white paper together puts their email in, We've already got a ton of notes underway. I think what we need to do is look at the themes that are emerging and seeing if there is a framework that's appearing within that, and then test that with you over the next couple of weeks, and then see if we've got something that we can take the next part of the conversation onto, which is more around how we can do some of those things, or whether we need to more valuably spend that time on thinking about that framework. So we can be absolutely flexible, but I think it would be good if if anyone wants to work on that formatting of a framework, if we've got lucky, that is, then I can email everyone after, and then we can see what we can pull together before our next session, which is in September. Is that, Mitch, what you were sort of getting at there, so that we've got...
Brilliant. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I do believe that we could, once we get to something that's a little bit more fully formed, that people can understand just by seeing, we can start promoting elsewhere to get input, even if it's just in the RSA US Slack channel that everybody can have access. We can provide access to everybody, where there's an actual channel on this process, so that people can see documents, share ideas. Certainly we can share ideas via email back and forth. My hope is that we keep the conversation going, that it's not just sort of like we go out of this with some momentum and then we don't hear from each other until next month.
There's also a second sheet on this sheet, just for other notes that don't fit into this format that you feel that you want to bring up. And there are a couple things that I put in there also, but people should feel free to use that, or create a new sheet for other things too.
Yeah, there's a lot of material in there already. I've made copious notes already as well, which I'll add in. I think there's some great stuff in there already. There really is.
Yeah, and there's great stuff in chat. It's really been great. Is there anybody that hasn't said anything? Like Wendy, I don't know if we've heard. Hans, I know you've commented in the chat. Anything you want to bring to the table?
Well, I've got a 6 and 3-year-old who are studying right now. So thinking about 3 and 6-year-olds, what are they going to be facing? Not to mention, we talk about, Black Lives Matter and social justice stuff that's also impacting the school system at the same time. My dad's from British India. I'm a Londoner, proud Brit. My mom's from Malaysia. My wife's Croatian. I sit here in Toronto working with you fellows in the US and representing the RSA. It's much more than just digital. It's also, what is the substance of knowledge? How do we impart it? We talk about fake news, but fake news is not new. Rudolf Hearst, he did fake way back when with the Cuban crisis in Spain. There needs to be a bit of a reset as to what is the state, what is knowledge, what is Westphalia, and where does history dictate what the future is. So, and some of these elements are missing in current conversations that we say, well, it's all about digital, all about technology. Well, I'm a bit of a medievalist. There's nothing new with what we're doing. There's always restructuring, reorganizing. They're just different tools, whether it's a fountain pen, JavaScript, you name it, punch cards. At times of crisis like now, people like us need to come together and ask the real hard questions, not the easy ones. And I see a lot of easy questions being asked, but the real difficult ones are not being asked. And I think that's the real challenge we face going forward.
I think one of the reasons why we all should be really happy that Maria is joining us is that Maria really understands what's happening around the world in terms of what solutions are being created and how they're being funded, and what the people with money think are going to be successful. And so as we start really moving into solutions, probably more in the next session than this session, we can be bouncing a lot of the ideas off Maria, who can then say, well, look, there are people who are doing this, or this just isn't getting any support from the financial community, probably because of so-and-so. But she's a great resource for us.
I agree.
I would like to add here something, because I started investing into education more or less 9 years ago in Brazil, and we were very successful. But what I realized, it's extremely difficult to support or innovate in the public schools. It's very difficult to get accepted because there are political views which are different. And that's one of the reasons why many top private universities have excellent online distance learning programs, private high schools in the US have excellent platforms. You don't get into the public space. And that's, I think, is one of the reasons why there is such a big gap between certain private institutions and then finally the public schools. It's extremely difficult. People are not that open because you are considered, okay, financial community, they are looking at the profit. But it's a fact. Usually innovation is driven where money is available because somehow it has to be paid innovation. It's not for free. That's just as a side note.
I would agree with that. Where we see a lot of venture capital investment, that's not the only investment. Of course, the biggest investor in spender of money in education is the government and parents. In terms of venture capital investment, it's not really the B2B, like supporting universities or schools or so on. It's mainly, it's all in the B2C area, which is direct to consumer. We see a lot of people moving to that space because parents and individuals themselves are wanting to sort of spend money on supplementary at the K-12 space, supplementary education, but that's mostly happening in developing countries. There's not as much in sort of mature economies. The US is probably the example that's different to, say, Europe and so on, where supporting EdTech in schools or technology-based innovations in schools is much, much less than in, say, for example, developing countries, but they're more the governments are more privatized in terms of even K-12 education compared with what we see in more sort of mature or developed economies, where the vast majority of society say, well, the government's responsible for paying for my kids for education. It's a social service. The government should pay. Why should I also pay? But in developing economies, that's not even the psychology. It's completely different. They will pay, absolutely, and they'll spend up to a half of their household income on supplementary education for their children. It's just a different culture. So it's
just, I have seen, as I'm originally from Switzerland and now living in the US, during the lockdown, Switzerland, which has an extremely good public school system, at least for primary and secondary education. I mean, every state, and they are very small, has their own policies. They were just discussing 5 weeks which online video system we might use to have distance learning, and 1 month was over. Whereas here in the US, a private school decided quickly and it was set up, and 1 week later, there was an excellent platform where you could hand in the exams. The kids were writing their exams with the camera on. Teachers were able to figure out whether they are doing something else. So that's a bit, the innovation cycle is very slow. It's not a critics. I know government needs a bit more time to make decisions because there are many stakeholders.
The research that showed about the developing countries having the individuals look for it, I would love if there was any type of qualitative research that talks about what they're thinking and why they do it, as opposed, like, is it just the dearth of information or just because they want X, Y, or Z? Like that, getting deeper into that, I would love to know. So any type of information that can help to add color to perhaps the decisions that we end up with in terms of our main tentpoles for this.
Yeah, one of the things that's difficult here is that in a system of any, whether it's a technology system or a human system or an organizational system, everything's connected to everything else, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can't just change one part of the system because it's impacted by every other part. So the way in which a school system in any country or state or whatever is and how education occurs is completely embedded in its context, 100%. And so it's social context, cultural, economic, and so on. And in country X and country Y are completely different, and their systems are different because their countries are different, their culture is different, their context is different. The wicked problem is changing an education system which is it's completely embedded in its geographic, cultural, economic context, because then what you're talking about is changing significant parts of the way people live and what they think about education and how they raise their kids. And, you know, the whole concept of winning and getting A's and so on is deeply culturally embedded. That's hard to change, really hard to change.
Right, but I think I agree on all counts, and it's hard. I want to be optimistic in this exercise and looking again at this pandemic has forced change and has forced us to look at all these different things. And so whatever we can do to help, and when I say what's happening, what are people thinking? We've always looked at different societies and said, that's really cool what they're doing. We don't have that in practice here. How can I bring that to, even if it's just my own life? And then who knows where it goes from there. That's something that I think we can have a play with, which is really compelling.
Yeah.
Before we log off, because Amy did pose the question, are we focusing on learning or education?
And
I don't
just
know
countered that we can't separate them.
Right. It might be that
goes back to what Maria was saying, where are we focusing on the system or are we focusing on learning itself? It sounds like the system, but like she said, those are very, very different things.
And we're focused on the K-16 system and not the fact that the system is almost non-existent after college in many environments when we have such a large proportion of people who need reskilling, retraining, etc.
So I'm going to posit this. I'm like, for a framing reason, because this is Augmented Society Network, not the Education Network. It's society. We know that this really isn't just tied to K through 16, as if that wasn't a big enough pie to try to get through itself. This is, how does this affect society? Because that's why if we can come up with the really fundamental core needs, we can communicate that and help to influence at least thought on regardless of the generation you're in, regardless of where you are in education, whether it's formal or lifelong or what have you, that it can help put this stuff together and create that future form of learning or education that we hope to be able to influence.
Yeah, and that might be a helpful framing if it's society focused.
So again, as we move forward, please communicate. It's a whole feedback loop here, and I'm honored that we're all having this conversation and to be a part with a lot of you, some of you whom I've known, and some are brand new, and I can't wait to learn more about you and communicate more. So I really appreciate that. We really appreciate that. Let's just really have fun with this and see what we could devise without the limitations that have been set forth by the crap. And I'm saying that not that it's in the pejorative. There's just so much stuff out there, and there's so many ways we've been living. What if we could start all over again? And that's, to me, a really exciting exercise to engage with all of you on, because there's even if it's just a small little kernel of something that affects really good change, whether it's in myself, whether it's in the group of us, whether it's in Hans' kids that are right in front of the screen. And that's awesome. I love that. Thank you, everybody. I look forward to the continued conversation about this. Very excited.
So we'll see you all on the 24th, I hope, again at 12 noon. And just to let everyone know, Amy's got a new cat, which needs 2 new cats. Hello. So hopefully you'll be with us again next time. Thank you ever so much. And please take care of yourselves.
Bye,
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye. Cheers.
Great.